The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wide enough to hold 10,000 beings from across the stars. And today every seat was filled with representatives from 7 ancient races who had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed on Earth. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood alone at the center of the circular floor, while thousands of eyes from dozens of species watched her with expressions ranging from pity to contempt to satisfaction. Aetherian Speaker, a being of pure crystalline energy that shifted between colors as it spoke, announced the final vote without ceremony or drama. "The council has decided," the speaker said, its voice resonating through translation devices in 1,000 languages simultaneously. "Humanity is hereby expelled from all territories within the galactic community. Effective immediately, you have 1 standard year to remove all colonies, stations, military vessels, and citizens from settled space." The chamber erupted in a mixture of relief and celebration for most species present. Though a few remained silent and thoughtful, Sarah had expected this outcome for months now. Ever since the incident at Proxima Station, where human security forces had killed 3 Serpentine diplomats who were attempting to smuggle weapons to a terrorist cell. The Council had called it an overreaction and proof of humanity's violent nature. Never mind that the diplomats were actually guilty or that the terrorists had planned to detonate an antimatter device in a civilian habitat. She raised her hand in the ancient protocols of the Council. Chamber granted her one final chance to speak. "Honored members of the Council," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of this moment. "I accept your decision on behalf of humanity. We will comply with your terms and withdraw from all settled territories within the time frame you have specified." The Aetherian speaker seemed surprised by her calm acceptance. Perhaps it had expected her to beg or argue or rage against the injustice. "However," Sarah continued, "I must deliver one final warning that I hope you will take seriously, even though I know you will not." Ripple of annoyance passed through the chamber at her presumption. For the past 42 years since humanity joined the galactic community, we have been quietly patrolling the dark borders at the edge of settled space, Sarah said. And now she had their attention because the dark borders were a topic the elder races preferred not to discuss. Your ancestors abandoned those regions 10,000 years ago, after encountering something that nearly destroyed your civilizations. You retreated to the core territories and pretended the threat had simply vanished into the void. The Serpentine Concordat's representative, an ancient being called the Scalekeeper, shifted uncomfortably in its hovering platform. It alone among the council members knew exactly what Sarah was referring to. "We found your old warning beacons out there," Sarah continued. "We decoded them and learned about the Devourers, the enemy that consumes matter and energy and leaves nothing but empty space in its wake. We learned that your ancestors didn't defeat this enemy, but merely hid from it, and hoped it would never return. Ancient history and superstition," the collective spokesperson said. The Gestalt AI consciousness spoke through 100 voices in perfect unison. "Our scans of the dark borders show no credible threats and have not for millennia. Your scans don't go deep enough because you're too afraid to look," Sarah replied bluntly. "Humanity has been fighting skirmishes with Devourer scouts for decades now. Small encounters that we handled quietly so you could sleep peacefully in your core worlds. We've lost thousands of soldiers and dozens of ships, keeping them contained. More human warmongering," the Aetherian speaker declared. "You fabricate threats to justify your militaristic culture. We're not fabricating anything," Sarah said. And there was something in her voice now that made even the most dismissive council members pause. "We've captured Devourer technology. We've interrogated their organic components before they dissolved. We've mapped their staging areas in the deep dark between galaxies. And every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. They're preparing for a major incursion, and the only thing that stopped them so far is humanity's presence on the borders. The Deep Mind Communion's representative, a being that existed primarily in oceanic environments and appeared here through a sophisticated hologram, spoke in its liquid-sounding voice. Even if we believed your claims of this ancient enemy, what makes humanity uniquely qualified to oppose it? Sarah smiled grimly at the question. Because we're willing to do what needs to be done, she answered. Your civilizations have grown soft and comfortable over thousands of years of peace. You've forgotten how to fight wars of survival against an enemy that doesn't negotiate or surrender or even communicate. The Devourers exist only to consume and expand, and stopping them requires a level of violence and sacrifice that your cultures can no longer stomach. We have advanced weapons and defensive systems far beyond human technology, the collective countered. Our combined fleets number in the hundreds of thousands. You have ceremonial weapons that you haven't used in actual combat for generations, Sarah said. Your soldiers train in simulations, and your commanders study historical battles like they're studying art. When was the last time any of your species actually fought a war of extinction? The silence that followed was telling because every member of the council knew the answer was thousands of years ago. Before the founding of the galactic community itself, the Scalekeeper finally spoke in its ancient, weary voice. Let us assume for a moment that you are correct about this thread. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything, Sarah said. I'm simply warning you that when you force humanity to abandon the dark borders, there will be consequences. The Devourers will notice our absence, and they will come, and when they do, your advanced technology and superior numbers won't save you because you've forgotten the most important lesson of survival. And what lesson is that? The Etherian speaker asked with barely concealed contempt. That sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and oblivion is someone willing to stand in the dark and fight the monsters you pretend don't exist. Sarah replied. She looked around the chamber one last time, meeting the eyes of representatives from 100 different species. Humanity will comply with your exile, she said. But when the darkness comes for you, and you realize too late that we were telling the truth, remember that you chose this. Remember that we tried to warn you. And remember that the blood of billions will be on your hands because you were too proud to listen. With that, Ambassador Sarah Chun turned and walked out of the council chamber for the last time, leaving behind a galaxy that would soon learn the terrible price of its arrogance. 1 year later, the last human vessel crossed the terminus line that marked the boundary of settled space. Admiral James Hassan stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, indomitable, and watched the civilized galaxy shrink behind them. Sir, should we maintain monitoring stations near the border? His tactical officer asked. No, Hassan said quietly. They made their choice, now they'll live with it. Or die with it. He opened a final transmission to the Council on all frequencies. This is Admiral Hassan of the human fleet, he said. We are now beyond the terminus line as ordered. We warned you about what lurks in the dark. We told you what our absence would mean. When they come, and they will come, remember that we tried to tell you. Remember that you could have listened. Remember that you chose pride over wisdom. He closed the channel and turned to his crew. Set course for deep space, he ordered. We have work to do and a new home to build. The galaxy doesn't want us. But that doesn't mean we'll stop doing what needs to be done. The Indomitable and the 1,000 ships that followed it disappeared into the unexplored darkness beyond the terminus line. And the Galactic Council congratulated itself on finally ridding civilized space of the dangerous and barbaric humans. They would regret that decision sooner than any of them could imagine. 5 years had passed since humanity's exile, and the Galactic Council had never been more prosperous or self-satisfied with its decisions trade routes that humans had once monopolized through their aggressive merchant fleets now belonged to more civilized species. Cultural exchange programs flourished without the awkward presence of the barbaric newcomers. And the council chambers rang with speeches about how peace and wisdom had triumphed over violence and chaos. The Aetherian Federation led the expansion into formerly human-patrolled space with characteristic enthusiasm and lack of caution. Their first major project was the Paradise Ring, a chain of luxury resort worlds established in the sectors that humans had called the buffer zone. Wealthy Aetherians and other species paid enormous sums to visit these exotic frontier locations where they could experience the thrill of being near unexplored space while enjoying every comfort their advanced civilization could provide. Director Calith oversaw the Paradise Ring project from the flagship resort on Harmony Prime, a world that humans had designated as Outpost Theta 7 before their exile. Another record quarter, Calith announced to the board of investors through holographic connection. Revenue is up 47%, and we have bookings extending 3 years into the future. Clearly, the council made the right choice in removing the humans and their paranoid military restrictions from these beautiful worlds. The investors expressed their satisfaction through various species-specific gestures of approval. What none of them mentioned, because it would have been impolite and possibly bad for business, was that 3 minor listening posts in the outer system had gone silent over the past month. The first disappearance had been attributed to equipment failure, the second to a possible meteor strike, and the third was still under investigation when the mining colony on Harmony Prime's fourth moon failed to send its weekly status report. Calith finally authorized a physical investigation team. The security shuttle that arrived at the mining colony found something that would haunt its crew for the rest of their lives. The colony was intact but completely empty. 10,000 miners and support staff had simply vanished. Mining equipment still ran on automatic cycles. Cafeterias had meals half-eaten on tables. Personal quarters showed signs of people who had been in the middle of their daily routines when something happened. The security team's leader, a serpentine named Vess, sent an increasingly frantic series of reports back to Harmony Prime. "There's no sign of violence," Vess transmitted. "No damage to structures, no evidence of weapons discharge, no bodies, nothing. It's like everyone just ceased to exist simultaneously. Check for biological or chemical contamination," Calith ordered, trying to keep the fear out of its crystalline voice. "We've run every scan in our database," Vess replied. "The only anomaly is a strange energy signature we detected near the central processing facility. Our equipment can't identify it, and it doesn't match anything in Galactic community records." Calith felt something cold settle in the core of its being, an emotion that Aetherians rarely experienced because they had engineered most negative feelings out of their species generations ago. "Fear. Return to Harmony Prime immediately," Calith ordered. "Bring samples of everything you can and seal that colony." The security shuttle made it halfway back to Harmony Prime before all contact. Said Calith watched in horror as the shuttle's telemetry showed normal flight operations one moment and then simply stopped transmitting the next. No distress call, no warning, just silence within an hour. Calith had escalated the situation to the Aetherian High Command within a day. The entire Paradise Ring had been evacuated within a week. 3 more colonies in different sectors had gone silent in the same inexplicable manner. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions that stretched for days as representatives tried to understand what was happening. The collective deployed its most advanced AI analysis systems to study the energy signatures that investigation teams kept finding at disappearance sites. The pattern is unlike anything in our historical records, the collective reported. The energy signature suggests technology that operates on principles outside our current understanding of physics. It seems to interact with matter at a quantum level in ways that should not be possible. The Scalekeeper of the Serpentine Concordat listened to these reports with growing dread because it recognized something in the descriptions that the younger species did not finally. It requested a private session with the Council Senior Leadership. "I must share something that my people have kept hidden for 10,000 years, the Scalekeeper said, its ancient voice heavy with regret. "Not because we wished to deceive you, but because we hoped desperately that it would never become relevant again." The Scalekeeper projected holographic records from the deepest archives of Serpentine history, images and data that predated the Galactic Council itself, before the founding of the Council. Before the age of peace and cooperation, my people were a star-spanning empire that controlled a third of the galaxy, it began. We were proud and powerful and convinced of our superiority over all other species. The hologram showed the Serpentine Empire at its height. Thousands of worlds connected by technology that made current Council achievements seem primitive. Then we encountered them, the Scalekeeper continued. And the hologram shifted to show darkness, not the normal darkness of space, but something else. Something that seemed to consume light itself. We called them the Devourers because that is precisely what they did. They consumed matter, energy, information, even the fabric of space-time itself. They turned entire star systems into voids of nothingness. The Council members watched in growing horror as the historical records showed the fall of the Serpentine Empire. World after world going dark, fleets disappearing, billions dying. We threw everything we had at them, the Scalekeeper said. Our greatest weapons, our most advanced technology, our bravest warriors. And we barely slowed them down. For every Devourer ship we destroyed, 3 more appeared. They adapted to our tactics faster than we could develop new ones. How did you survive? The Deep Mind Communion representative asked quietly. We didn't defeat them, the Scalekeeper admitted. We retreated. We abandoned 2/3 of our territory and pulled back to the most defensible systems. We established the Dark Borders as a quarantine zone and prayed that the Devourers would lose interest in our remnant. The hologram showed the founding of the Galactic Council, how the traumatized Serpentine survivors had gathered other species, together in mutual defense and cooperation. We never told you the real reason we insisted on certain rules, the Scalekeeper said. Why we prohibited expansion beyond the Dark Borders, why we maintained the Terminus line, why we kept significant military forces even during millennia of peace. You were protecting us from the Devourers, the Aetherian speaker said. And for once, its voice held no arrogance or certainty. We were hoping they had died out or moved on to other galaxies, the Scalekeeper replied. 10,000 years of silence made us believe we were safe. That perhaps they had consumed everything in their territory and starved, or evolved beyond their need to devour, or simply left this region of space. And the humans? The collective asked. The Scalekeeper made a gesture of profound regret. The humans tried to warn us, it said. Ambassador Chen told us exactly what was happening, and we dismissed her as a warmonger. We exiled the one species that had been fighting the Devourers and keeping them contained. The council chamber fell into shocked silence as the implications settled over everyone present. The energy signatures at the disappearance sites, the Deep Mind Communion said slowly. They matched the records from 10,000 years ago. Exactly, the Scalekeeper confirmed. The Devourers have returned and they're testing our defenses. These disappearances are scouts, probing attacks to assess our capabilities and locate our population centers. How long before they attack in force? The Aetherian speaker asked, based on historical patterns. Weeks at most, the Scalekeeper replied. Once they've gathered sufficient intelligence, they'll launch a full invasion. The collective ran probability. calculations and shared the results with growing alarm. Our combined military forces have a 12% chance of stopping a full Devourer invasion, based on the historical records, it reported. And that assumes our technology has advanced enough in 10,000 years to be more effective than serpentine weapons were. We need help, the DeepMind communion said, voicing what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to admit. We need the humans, the Ethereum speaker said quietly. And the admission seemed to physically pain the crystalline being. The Scalekeeper shook its head slowly. After what we did to them, exiling them and calling them barbarians and refusing to listen to their warnings, why would they help us? Because billions of innocent lives are at stake, the collective said. Surely they would not allow genocide out of spite. There's only one way to find out, the Ethereum speaker said it. Took 3 days of debate for the council to compose the message and another day of arguing about who should send it finally. They agreed on a simple text transmission sent to the last known human coordinates beyond the terminus line. We require assistance. The message read, formal and brief, and containing not a single word of apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The Devourers came in darkness, not the normal darkness of space, but something deeper and more wrong. Something that seemed to consume light itself before it could reach observers. Ice Fleet Commander Zethis of the Ethereum Defense Force watched the sensor, displays with growing confusion as the enemy fleet materialized at the edge of the Taraxian cluster. That's impossible, Zethis said, looking at the readings that showed ships appearing from nowhere without any telltale signs of faster-than-light travel. Our sensors should have detected them entering the system. They didn't enter through normal space. The collective liaison officer reported from its station, controlling a dozen analytical systems simultaneously through its Gestalt consciousness. They're phasing directly into our reality from somewhere else, possibly from a different dimensional layer. The Devourer fleet numbered in the thousands. Each ship a nightmare fusion of organic and technological components that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Hulls that pulsed like living tissue, weapons that grew from the ship's surfaces like tumors, propulsion systems that bent space in ways that violated known physics. All Council fleets report ready for engagement, Zethis announced, trying to project confidence it didn't feel. We have them outnumbered 3-1, and our defensive positions are optimal. The combined armada of the Galactic Council spread across the Taraxian cluster in formations, refined over millennia of tactical study, representing the finest military achievement of 7 advanced civilizations, the Ethereum crystalline, ships with their reality shield generators that could withstand temperatures found in stellar cores. The collective's SI-controlled swarm vessels that operated with perfect coordination. The serpentine dreadnoughts mounting weapons that manipulated space-time itself. The DeepMind communion's living ships that adapted to threats in real time against them. The Devourers appeared almost primitive. Their ships crude and chaotic compared to the elegant Council vessels. Commence attack. Zethis ordered 10,000 Council ships open fire simultaneously in a display of devastating coordinated firepower that should have ended the battle in seconds. Energy. Beams capable of cracking planets. Missiles that could track targets through dimensional shifts. Kinetic rounds moving at relativistic speeds. All converged on the Devourer fleet in a storm of destruction. The Devourer simply absorbed it all. Zethis watched in horror as the energy weapons struck Devourer hulls and were consumed. Not reflected or dissipated, but actually eaten by the organic technological matrices. The missiles hit their targets and disappeared into pulsing flesh that seemed to grow stronger from the impact. Even the kinetic rounds vanished into the enemy ships like stones thrown into dark water. What in the depths? Zethis whispered the Devourers returned fire. Their weapons didn't look impressive. Irregular growths on their hulls that launched projectiles of condensed darkness. But when those projectiles hit Council ships, The results were catastrophic. A collective swarm cluster of 200 vessels disappeared in an instant. Not destroyed, but simply ceased to exist, leaving only empty space where they had been moments before an Aetherian. Cruiser's reality shields flickered and failed as darkness enveloped it. The crew's final transmission was a scream that cut off abruptly as the ship folded in on itself and vanished. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Zethus ordered, abandoning the carefully planned formations in favor of survival. The battle devolved into chaos as the fundamental assumptions of Council warfare proved worthless against an enemy that didn't follow the understood rules. The Serpentine tried their space-time weapons, tearing holes in reality to engulf Devour ships. But the enemy vessels simply moved through the distortions and emerged, undamaged on the other side. The DeepMind Communion's adaptive ships tried to evolve defenses against the darkness weapons. But there was nothing to adapt to. The Devour weapons didn't operate on any principle that biological or technological systems could counter. We need new tactics, the collective liaison announced, its 100 voices showing strain as it processed the impossible data. Standard engagement protocols are ineffective. Recommend immediate withdrawal to regroup and analyze. No, came a transmission from the Serpentine flagship, the Scalekeeper's ancient voice cutting through the chaos. If we retreat now, they'll pursue and pick us apart. Our only chance is to overwhelm them with numbers. Zethus wanted to argue, but the tactical situation left no alternatives. Retreat meant death. Staying meant death. But at least fighting gave them a chance. The battle raged for 3 days. The Council forces threw everything they had at the Devourers. Experimental weapons pulled from research laboratories. Forbidden technologies that violated a dozen treaties. Even desperate kamikaze runs by volunteer crews. Nothing worked. The Devourers adapted to every tactic faster than the Council could develop new ones. They learned from every attack and adjusted their defenses accordingly. Worse, they seemed to be feeding on the destruction, growing stronger as they consumed the wreckage of Council ships and the energy released by the battle on the 3rd day. Zethus received the casualty reports and felt something break inside. 40% of the combined Council fleet was gone. Not damaged or disabled, but completely erased from existence. Over 300,000 vessels and their crews simply wiped from reality, and the Devourers had lost perhaps 5% of their forces. This is Commander Zethus to all Council forces. It transmitted on all frequencies. General retreat. Fall back to the Zarian line. All ships withdraw immediately. The withdrawal was almost as costly as the battle itself, because the Devourers pursued relentlessly, picking off stragglers and damaged vessels by the time the survivors reached the Zarian line. The Council's Grand Armada had been reduced to scattered remnants. The emergency council session that followed was unlike anything in the organization's 3,000-year history. Representatives shouted over each other. Accusations flew. Panic was evident in every communication. We need to contact humanity again, the DeepMind Communion insisted, and begged for help from primitives who we exiled. An Aetherian junior representative demanded. The humiliation would be unbearable. The extinction would be worse, the Scalekeeper replied coldly. Even if we asked, why would they help us? Another voice called out. We treated them like criminals and threw them out of civilized space, because billions of innocent lives are at stake, the collective said. Surely they must have some compassion. We showed them no compassion. The Scalekeeper noted grimly. The debate raged for hours until finally the Aetherian speaker called for order. We have no choice, it said quietly, the defeat evident in its voice. Send another message to the humans. This time, we will ask properly. The second message was longer and more desperate than the first. First, it acknowledged the Council's error in exiling humanity. It admitted that the warnings had been correct. It included detailed data on the Devourer attacks and the Council's failed defensive attempts. It formally requested military assistance and promised to discuss terms of reinstatement. The message ended with something the proud elder races had never thought they would say to humanity. Please help us. We were wrong, and we are sorry. The response came within hours again, which meant the humans were still monitoring Council space closely, but this time, the message was different. We're aware of your situation, it read. We've been tracking the Devourer fleet since it entered your territory. We've been fighting their advanced scouts in the deep dark to slow their reinforcements. We've been watching the Battle of Taraxion and analyzing your tactics. There was a pause in the transmission, and the Council representatives held their collective breath. Your performance was disappointing but not unexpected. The message continued with brutal honesty. You fight like people who haven't had a real war in thousands of years. Elegant formations and precise maneuvers against an enemy that only understands consumption and expansion. Another pause. We're coming. The message finally stated. Not because you asked, not because you apologized, but because there are billions of people in Council space who had no say in our exile and don't deserve to die for your mistakes. The Council chamber erupted in relief and celebration, but the message wasn't finished. However, understand this clearly, it concluded. We're not coming to save you or restore your precious civilization to its former glory. We're coming to do what we've always done, stand between the darkness and everyone else. When this is over, we'll discuss terms. Until then, stay out of our way and try not to get yourselves killed. The transmission ended with coordinates for a rendezvous point at the Zarian line and an estimated arrival time of 48 Horshethis, pulled up long-range sensors and directed them toward the coordinates. Looking for signs of the approaching human fleet, what it saw made the Aetherian commander's crystalline structure actually shiver. The human armada was massive. Hundreds of vessels that looked nothing like the sleek exploration ships and merchant vessels humanity had operated during their time in Council space. These were warships, brutal and scarred and clearly built for one purpose only, and they were broadcasting a message ahead of them on all frequencies. A simple statement that sent chills through every species that heard it. We're coming. Stay out of our way. The Scalekeeper accessed the visual data and felt 10,000. Captain Maria Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Indomitable and watched. The tactical displays show their approach to the Zarian line where the broken remnants of the Council fleet waited. She was 34 years old, but looked 50. The hard years in exile and constant warfare aging her faster than normal time would have. Scars crossed her face from a Devourer weapon that had nearly killed her 3 years ago, and her right arm was more cybernetic than organic after the original had been consumed by darkness during a boarding action. Most of her bridge crew looked similar. Veterans marked by years of fighting an enemy that the Council had pretended didn't exist. Status report. Maria ordered. All fleet elements reporting ready. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Chun, replied. The young woman was actually the daughter of former Ambassador Sarah Chun, carrying on her mother's legacy in a different way. We're tracking 200 Devourer vessels holding position beyond the Zarian line with approximately 6,000 Council ships cowering behind their defensive perimeter. Don't be too hard on them, Maria said, though her voice held little sympathy. They've never fought anything like the Devourers before. We have 6 years, Maria thought. 6 years since the Council exiled humanity and forced them beyond the terminus line into unexplored space. The Council had expected humans to settle on some remote garden world and gradually fade into obscurity. Instead, humanity had done what it always did when faced with adversity. They adapted and they fought. Without the Council's restrictions on dangerous research and unethical military development, Human scientists and engineers had unleashed their full creativity. They developed weapons that would have horrified the civilized races. Technologies that bent or broke every ethical guideline the Council held sacred reality. Anchors that prevented matter from being disassembled at the quantum level. Entropic weapons that aged target vessels millennia in seconds. AI systems that were deliberately designed to be creative and unpredictable rather than logical and safe. Soldiers enhanced with genetic modifications and cybernetic implants that pushed human capabilities beyond anything natural, and they built habitats in places the Council considered uninhabitable. Asteroid fields where the constant collision risk kept everyone alert. Neutron star orbits where gravity was a weapon waiting to be deployed. Even the event horizons of black holes where time itself behaved strangely. The Council built cities on garden worlds and called themselves advanced humanity-built fortresses. In hell and called it home. Incoming transmission from Admiral Hassan, the communications officer, announced. Maria accepted the connection, and the grizzled face of Admiral James Hassan appeared on her screen. The old man commanded the fleet from his flagship, the battle carrier Defiant, and he looked even more worn than Maria felt. Captain Rodriguez, Hassan said, "Your squadron will take point when we engage. The Devourers will focus on the most aggressive targets first, and your people have the most experience dealing with their initial assault patterns." "Understood, sir," Maria replied. "My crew is ready." Hassan nodded slowly, his eyes showing the weight of command. "I know they are," he said. "I also know that many of them won't be coming back from this fight. None of us might. We knew the cost when we crossed the terminus line." "Sir," Maria said, "we're here because it's the right thing to do, not because we expect gratitude or glory. The Council still doesn't understand what they're asking of us," Hassan said quietly. "They think this is just another battle where we'll swoop in and solve their problem with our superior tactics or secret weapons." "They'll learn," Maria replied grimly. Hassan signed off, and Maria turned her attention to the crew. "All hands. This is the captain," she announced over the ship-wide intercom. "In approximately 1 hour, we'll be engaging the Devourer fleet that destroyed 40% of the Council's forces in 3 days. The same enemy that's been trying to break through our defensive lines in the deep dark for 6 years. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The Council representatives watching this battle will be horrified by what they see us do." She continued, "They'll call our tactics barbaric and our methods excessive. They'll clutch their pearls and write concerned reports about humanity's violent nature. They'll probably decide we're too dangerous to allow back into civilized space." She could hear grim laughter from some crew members. "But here's what they won't understand," Maria said, her voice hardening. "We don't fight the way we do because we're savage or primitive. We fight this way because it's what works against an enemy like the Devourers. We take casualties because that's the price of victory. We use tactics that seem suicidal because sometimes sacrifice is the only option. The Council fights wars like they're playing chess," she concluded. "We fight wars like we're fighting for survival because that's exactly what this is. Not a battle for territory or resources or political advantage, but a fight to preserve life itself against an enemy that exists only to consume." She took a breath and delivered the final message. "We're humanity," she said simply. "We stand in the dark so others can live in the light. We pay the price so they don't have to. That's what we've always done, and it's what we'll do today." All hands to battle stations. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. Taking positions they'd occupied dozens of times in real combat against Devourer scouts and raiders. Maria settled into her command chair and pulled up the tactical display showing the human fleet in all its scarred glory. Indomitable was a Titan-class dreadnought, built not for elegance, but for pure destructive capability. Its hull was layered with adaptive armor that had been grown from Devour tissue samples and trained to resist their weapons. Its main armament was an entropic cannon that could age a target ship 10,000 years in 3 seconds. And it carried a crew of 2,000 soldiers and specialists who had all survived at least 5 engagements with the enemy around. It sailed the rest of humanity's exile fleet. The battle carrier Defiant with its swarm of fighter craft piloted by enhanced humans, whose reflexes operated at superhuman speeds. The siege ships relentless and unstoppable that mounted reality anchors, capable of stabilizing space against Devour dimensional attacks. The stealth cruisers Shadow and Whisper that could move through dark matter itself to strike from unexpected angles, and dozens more. Each vessel unique and specialized, each crew veteran and scarred. Each ship bearing damage from battles the Council had never known were being fought. "We're approaching weapons range," Lieutenant Chen reported. "All ships, engage at will." Hassan's voice came through fleet-wide communication. "Remember your training and watch each other's backs. Humanity stands together." The human fleet accelerated toward the Devourer line, and the enemy responded with eager hunger, viewing these new arrivals as just more matter to consume. They had no idea what they were actually facing. The first exchange of fire showed the difference between human and Council tactics immediately, where the Council ships had fired precise, coordinated volleys from carefully maintained formations. The human fleet came in like a chaotic swarm, every ship moving independently but somehow supporting each other through what appeared to be pure instinct. The Devourers launched their darkness weapons, expecting to see human vessels fold and disappear like the Council ships had. Instead, the reality anchors aboard the siege ships activated, creating bubbles of stabilized space-time that the Devourer weapons couldn't penetrate. Human vessels inside those bubbles survived hits that should have erased them from existence, and humanity returned fire with weapons the Devourers had never encountered. The entropic cannons aged Devourer hulls until they crumbled into dust. The kinetic rounds were coated with exotic matter that poisoned the organic components of enemy ships. The fighter craft deployed quantum missiles that existed in multiple states simultaneously and couldn't be consumed because they weren't entirely real. Most importantly, the human crews fought with a ferocity and willingness to sacrifice that the Devourers couldn't predict or counter. When a Devourer ship got too close to the Defiant, Hassan didn't pull back or maneuver for advantage. He ordered his ship to ram the enemy vessel at full speed. Using the Defiant's armored prow as a weapon, the two ships collided in a shower of debris and energy, both severely damaged. But the Defiant's crew kept fighting while the Devourer vessel tried to consume the wreckage. "All fighters, target that ship's organic components," Hassan ordered, even as his bridge lost atmosphere and crew members died around him. "Burn it from the inside." The Defiant's fighter wings swarmed into the wound opened by the collision and unleashed incendiary weapons that ignited the Devourer ship's living tissue. The enemy vessel thrashed and died in flames while the Defiant slowly pulled away, trailing atmosphere and burning. Metal Maria watched the engagement and understood what Hassan was teaching the Devourers through brutal example. Humanity could not be consumed because humanity would poison you on the way down. The battle raged on. Human ships trading damage for kills, crews sacrificing themselves to destroy priority targets, commanders making decisions that would give Council ethicists nightmares, and slowly, impossibly, the tide began. The Devourers were learning that these new enemies didn't fight according to any pattern or doctrine they could adapt to. Every human ship seemed to operate on different principles, every tactic. The Battle of the Zarian Line continued for 18 hours of continuous combat that would be studied by military historians for generations. Though they would struggle to understand the human tactics that made victory possible, Maria's ship, the Indomitable, had taken severe damage in the first 6 hours when a Devourer cruiser had managed to breach their reality anchor field and score a direct hit with a darkness weapon. The entire port side of the dreadnought had aged 10,000 years in an instant. Corridors crumbling to dust and systems failing catastrophically. Maria and her crew had adapted. They always adapted. Seal sections 12 through 34. She ordered calmly while alarms screamed throughout the ship. Reroute power through the starboard systems and angle us so our intact side faces the enemy. Captain, we've lost 40% of our offensive capability, Lieutenant Chen reported. Blood running down her face from a head wound she was ignoring. Then we'll make the remaining 60% count for double. Maria replied. The Indomitable kept fighting, kept pushing forward, kept showing the Devourers that humanity didn't retreat or surrender around the battlefield. Similar scenes played out on dozens of human vessels. Ships that should have withdrawn for repairs instead stayed in the fight. Crews that should have evacuated instead manned their stations until death or victory. Devourers had never encountered an enemy quite like this. Species that fought with logic and self-preservation, calculating odds and retreating when necessary, accepting surrender when offered. Following rules of engagement, humanity did none of these. Things they fought like the universe had personally offended them, and they were determined to make it regret the insult when a devourer flagship began charging its planet-killer weapon, targeting the Aetherian colony world of Harmony Prime, where 4 billion civilians sheltered in fear. Every sensor in the human fleet detected it simultaneously. Target designated Priority Alpha. Admiral Hassan transmitted to all human vessels. That weapon cannot be allowed to fire. All ships. Solutions? The Tactical A is aboard every human ship, ran calculations, and came back with the same answer. No ship could reach the flagship in time to stop the weapon from firing. The Devourer defensive screen was too heavy, and the charging sequence too far advanced. No ship, except one, the Indomitable, was closest to the flagship, separated by only 60,000 kilometers and a screen of Devourer escort vessels. But Maria's ship was already crippled and barely combat effective. Arya looked at the numbers and understood what they meant. Admiral, this is Captain Rodriguez, she transmitted calmly. Indomitable can reach the flagship if we divert all power to engines and use the remaining reality anchor as a battering ram. There was a long pause before Hassan responded, and Maria knew the old admiral was looking at the same tactical projections she was, the ones that gave the Indomitable a 98% chance of being destroyed in the attempt. Maria, Hassan said quietly, using her first name for the first time in years. You know what you're proposing is suicide. I know, sir, Maria replied. But it's also the only option that saves 4 billion people. That seems like a fair trade. She looked around her bridge at the crew who had served with her through 6 years of exile and warfare. Young faces and old, human, and a few aliens who had chosen to leave the council and join humanity's cause. Any crew member who wants to evacuate, do it now, Maria announced. This is a volunteer mission only. Not a single person moved toward the escape pods, Lieutenant. Chun smiled grimly and said what they were all thinking. We came here to stand between the darkness and the light. Captain, that's exactly what we're doing. Maria felt pride and sorrow war in her chest. Helm, plot a ramming course, she ordered. Engineering, divert everything to forge shields and engines, weapons. Give me one last shot from the entropic cannon on my mark. The Indomitable turned toward the Devourer flagship and accelerated to attack speed. The crippled dreadnought moving like a wounded predator, making one final strike. The Devourer escorts tried to intercept, but human fighter wings swarmed them in coordinated fury, sacrificing themselves to clear a path for the Indomitable. 20 seconds to impact. The helm officer reported 15 seconds until planet killer. fires. Tactical, added. Maria watched the numbers count down and thought about everything that had led to this moment. The Council's arrogance, humanity's exile. 6 years of lonely warfare in the dark. All of it leading to right here. Right now. Fire Entropic Can, she ordered. The Indomitable's main weapon discharged one last time, sending a beam of compressed entropy into the Devour flagship's charging weapon. The exotic energies interacted catastrophically, and the planet killer began to overload. 10 seconds to impact. All hands. Brace for collision, Maria transmitted, then switched to fleet-wide communication. Admiral Hazan, it's been an honor serving with you. To all Council species listening, I hope you remember what this cost and what we did for you. 5 seconds. Maria looked at her crew one last time. Humanity stands. She said quietly. The Indomitable struck the Devourer flagship at relativistic speed while the planet killer weapon was overloading. The combined energies released in the collision were equivalent to a supernova compressed into a single point of space. The explosion vaporized both ships instantly and created a shockwave that destroyed or disabled every vessel within 10,000 kilometers. Human and Devourer alike, but the planet killer never fired. 4 billion civilians on Harmony Prime lived because 2,100 humans chose to die. Sacrifice broke something in the Devourer fleet's cohesion. They had adapted to human weapons and tactics, but they couldn't adapt to human willingness to pay any price for victory when the human fleet pressed their advantage with renewed fury. The Devourers began to retreat for the first time in recorded history. Admiral Hassan, commanding from the heavily damaged Defiant, didn't let them go easily. All ships pursue, he ordered. Drive them back beyond the dark borders and make sure they understand that this galaxy is defended. The running battle continued for another 6 hours as the human fleet chased the Devourers back to the edge of explored space. Every kilometer paid for in blood and sacrifice by the time the enemy finally fled into the deep dark between galaxies. The human fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength, but they had one Admiral Hazan established a defensive perimeter along the dark borders and sent a transmission to the Council. The immediate threat has been neutralized, he reported. However, the Devourers will return. They always do. Humanity will maintain a defensive line at the borders to monitor for future incursions. He paused, then added with deliberate emphasis, "We'll send you our terms for continued cooperation shortly." The council chambers erupted in chaotic debate when Hazan's message arrived. Some representatives argued for immediately offering humanity full reinstatement with honors. Others suggested partial membership with restrictions. A few diehards still insisted humanity was too dangerous to allow into civilized space. The arguments went on for days while human crews stood watch on the dark borders, burying their dead and repairing their damaged ships. Finally, Ambassador Sarah Chun, now elderly but still representing humanity in exile, received an invitation to address the council. She stood once more in the great chamber where she had delivered her warning 6 years earlier. Looking at the same species who had dismissed her as a warmonger, honored members of the council, Sarah began. You asked for my people's help, and we provided it. We lost over 60% of our fleet and thousands of our best people, including Captain Maria Rodriguez, who sacrificed herself and her crew to save 4 billion Aetherians. The chamber fell silent. Now you debate whether to allow us back into civilized space, whether to offer us full membership or partial status or continued exile with maybe some trade agreements, Sarah continued. You argue about what humanity deserves and what risks we pose to your peaceful civilization. She looked around the chamber with eyes that had seen far too much. Let me make this simple for you, she said. Humanity doesn't want your apologies or your gratitude. We don't need your permission to exist or your approval of our methods. We've built a civilization beyond the terminus line that suits us just fine. The council members exchanged confused glances. What we will do, Sarah continued, is continue guarding the dark borders as we have for the past 6 years. We'll stand watch against the Devourers and any other threats that emerge from the deep dark. We'll do the dirty work that your civilizations can no longer stomach. In exchange, we want 3 things, she said. First, free passage through council space for human vessels and citizens. Second, access to council trade networks and scientific databases. Third, acknowledgement that the galaxy's peace exists, because people are willing to fight for it in the darkness where you refuse to look. The Aetherian speaker started to respond, but Sarah held up her hand. Those are not negotiating positions, she said firmly. Those are the terms. Accept them or don't. But understand that either way, humanity will continue doing what we've always done. And what is that? The DeepMind Communion asked, standing between the light and the dark. Sarah replied, paying the price that civilization demands but pretends doesn't exist. Being the monsters who protect you from worse monsters. The Scalekeeper spoke for the first time, its ancient voice.